Welcome to Escape Velocity, a podcast to unpack the 0 to 1 journey of founders who have built successful, scaled businesses today that we all admire. Going from formation stage to product market fit is often the most messy and least linear part of the startup journey. In this series, we dive into the early parts of the founder journey and understand the lessons of successful founders who have gone from an idea to finding product market fit and beyond. Our guest today is Brian Long, co-founder and CEO of Adaptive Security. Before Adaptive, Brian was co-founder and CEO of Attentive, last valued at $7 billion. Let's get started. All right, Brian, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, good to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right into it. So, Brian, you've been a repeat entrepreneur. You sold your first company to Twitter. You scaled Attentive, your second company, to a $6 billion behemoth. Now you're working on another set of companies. What drove you initially as an entrepreneur?
I think a few different things. Number one, I just sort of like building and tinkering with things and sort of coming up with ideas and trying to make stuff. I think number two is just being able to work with people that I liked and feeling like there was a sense of that.
And tell us about the path to becoming an entrepreneur the first time. So what was the journey like before? What were you up to? What gave you the sort of confidence or to take the leap of faith and jump into your first entrepreneurial venture?
I'd done various sort of side projects and side little company ideas and things for a long time, since I was in like 8th or 9th grade. So had been doing it for a long time. I think that after school, I kind of had one in school I was doing. It wasn't really working out into being a big business. So I went to go work at a tech company, learn a bit of the reins, then went to go work at a startup. And I kind of quickly said, you know what? I feel like I've got enough that I can go do this now. In reality, I probably could have worked at other people's companies for longer before starting mine, because I still didn't know that much when I started it. But once you're doing it full time and take the dive, it gets a lot more real quickly.
And, you sold your company successfully to Twitter, your first company, Tap Commerce. How quickly did you start to get that itch again to start a new company?
Yeah, I mean, we sold the company, the deal closed, we joined Twitter, and I think like the next day after, I knew I would start another company. And I have a distinct memory of a lunch I had with someone else that was in a similar situation that sold their company to Twitter. And I was like, oh, aren't you just so excited to start another company? And he said, no, I don't want to start another company. I could never imagine doing another company. It was so terrible. And I was like, oh, I kind of feel the opposite way.
Super interesting. And I guess, so when you decided to go at it again, we talk a lot in Silicon Valley about the advantages of being a second-time founder. What do you think are some of the disadvantages or blind spots of second-time founders?
Well, I mean, I think that I think there's kind of two things that pop into mind for me. Number one is that you begin a race against yourself in how you've done previously. And if you start doing not as well as you did on your last company, then you start saying like, what am I doing wrong? Did I just get lucky? All that sort of stuff. So that's part one of it. I think part two is maybe there's a sense within you and some of your team that like you'd already made it and you're not as like hungry and have as hard of an edge and sort of that drive that you did the first time. That hasn't so much been an issue with me, but the first thing, the piece around racing yourself, is definitely a problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. On one hand, you'd think that you'd have the sort of confidence and say, I've done it before, I know how to do this. But to your point, when things don't going well, how do you actually have the grit and perseverance to keep going?
I think doing it a second time is very humbling because it's hard. It is hard to get it off the ground. Now, I think it's fun. I think it's great. I think it's better than like every other job. The part of it of doing it again and sort of seeing where you are compared to where you were at the other company. Like in my experience, when I started my second company, the first company that I did was more successful in the first year and a half than the second company was in the first year and a half of its existence. At about the 2-year mark, though, which was when I sold the first company, the second company, at about I guess it was about 2.5 years in, the second company started doing really well. But for the first 2.5 years, it did not do as well as the first company. So it was kind of like what did I learn? Because I'm not even doing as well as I did the first time.
Yeah, there's a learning in there around just like how do you think about that 0 to 1 phase and sort of separating noise and signal, right? Because those early days, you're hearing a lot of information back from customers. You're trying to figure out, is this working, not working? Maybe you get a false start in one space that starts to pull you in one specific direction versus another. Curious, like especially the second time around, how did you think about that 0 to 1 phase, constructing the right set of hypotheses or tests or frameworks to be able to approach that in a way that got you to an answer, in product market fit eventually?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the biggest difference that between number one and number two for me is longer term thinking. So I think for number one, it was always like, I just got to make the next quarter, the next fundraise, get me to this thing. Let's get to an exit, whatever. For the second one, it was like, okay, I know that you can go farther. I know you can go longer. So let's think a little further out and think how big this thing can be. Now with the third company, I'm very long term oriented. I'm thinking, okay, what can this company be in 5, 10 years? And what's going to change in the world? What's the world going to look like? What's this kind of competitive landscape going to look like? Where am I going to be in that competitive landscape? And I think that those decisions are actually, I mean, I hope that it's a better way of thinking about it. But it's different. It's different than kind of playing for today or tomorrow.
Yeah. And so tell us about finding the problem that you wanted to solve for Attentive initially. Like, how did you come up with that initial idea? Was there a specific spark that got you interested in that sector?
Yeah, so we had another product that we were selling, and I remember I had a conversation with someone who I believe was like a C-level executive at Choice Hotels, and they were saying to me, they said, we don't really want to buy the product you're selling us, but what we really like is a better way to communicate with our customers and try to sell them stuff and communicate with them via text message. Because we were trying to sell them another use case for text for talking to their employees. So anyway, they were like, we want this. And that was surprising to me. And I think in doing more diligence, I figured out, wow, very few companies are actually using text messaging to market and communicate with their customers. Now, obviously, a lot of people are doing two-factor authentication or like your orders on the way type of crap, but not much beyond that. So it's a market I didn't realize, like I had assumed it was already a mature market when it was not.
And do you think that generally founders should be focusing on problem sets that they know well or spaces maybe that they came from? Or you think it's equally plausible or successful to actually just go top down and find a problem set and go build a company to go solve that specific problem?
I think in order of magnitude, like in order of priority, the most important things are that it's a real burning problem. If you are trying to make $1 billion plus business that will grow really fast, then you need to focus on big market, that's growing. So a really big TAM, growing market where you can, get a relatively small part of the market and still have a pretty darn big business, right? I like those markets. I think those markets are a lot easier to do. Now, should you do something where you're more familiar with it or not? I don't think so. I personally think that there are way too many companies building for, say, software engineers or salespeople from tech companies are building products for themselves. There's way too many of those companies because they're building it for themselves and what they know. But there's actually a tremendous amount of other opportunities out there if you're willing to take the time to learn and dig in and pick something up pretty quickly. Now, it's a hell of a lot easier to raise money if, someone thinks you're already credible on a thing and you can kind of skip that whole learning process and go straight to it. But the other thing I found is that knowledge ages really quickly. So if you think you know about a category or a market or something, in a couple of years, you don't. And I think you actually end up making a lot of mistakes because you're like, oh no, this is the way that market goes. I've seen this story before. I heard so many times from people that were big experts in text messaging. You'll never build a text message marketing company at scale because illegal. You'll never build a text message marketing company at scale because this market sucks. It's not growing. You'll never build a company. Like I remember distinctly, I met with this guy who's a CMO of a big retail company, and he'd worked in text message marketing for like 10 years. So he's one of the most experienced people out there. And he like laughed us out of the room and told us that this is we were a year in, and I remember he told me a text message marketing company will never be worth more than like $50 million. It's crazy to think it'll ever be worth more than that, and our most last fundraiser is at 7.5 billion. But like, this is someone who was an expert. So I think you need to be really careful about taking advice from people who had spent a lot of time in an area, because their advice is often dated.
No, I think that's phenomenal advice. And so take us back then, put us in your shoes. You're at Twitter, you're leaving, you're about to start Attentive before the pivot. Talk us through what excited you about that initial market that you guys were entering into. What kind of work had you done before you decided to launch?
We had worked on a text message product to communicate between businesses and their employees. It turned out that some companies wanted that, but they weren't willing to pay that much money for it. And we just looked at the forecast based on how we were doing, and we said, there's something here, there's a business here, but it's not going to be that big. So we were kind of demotivated by that, because we wanted, we were looking, comparing it to our prior company and how well that had gone, and said, this is not going to be like that. This is going to be less successful. So when you're trying to find something more successful, that's the challenge.
And when you were getting started, you had this initial idea about where you wanted to go. Talk to us about the founding team, the co-founder. I know you brought on some repeat folks from your previous company, but tell us about what the most important attributes in that founding team.
So all of the companies I've started has been myself and my co-founder, Andrew Jones. And we really have, we both play a big part in the whole side of the business and run it together, but I probably focus the most on everything go to market, and he focuses on the day-to-day execution of EPD in building software companies. And we kind of bring that together to something that can go to market and be really strong. So, that's worked out really well for us. And then we've been lucky to work with, some people across a number of different functions for many years. When I started Attentive, I was able to recruit in people who had worked with me at several prior companies and, a number of different functions.
And, obviously when you've worked with somebody, it's a little bit easier to hopefully get them excited about taking that early stage risk. But so many founders sometimes struggle with building that early team, because it's the people who are joining obviously are taking a huge flyer on the idea and on these individuals. What have you found to be the best recruitment pitch in your experience for getting those early team members on board?
Well, number one, I think, is understanding what somebody wants. So what do you want in your career? Where are you trying to go? And then understanding, can I deliver that for this person? And if so, what can I promise them in this company that will be on the pathway to achieving that goal? That's probably the easiest way for me to tie together any recruiting I do, is just, what do you want? What's your goal? Where are you going? And then, okay, do I have the ability to deliver that or not?
I love that framework. That's a great way to, I think a lot of these early team members are oftentimes also, if you can talk to them about the longer term vision of what their arc will be, not only at that company, but what that sets them up for afterwards as well, in terms of just the growth potential of going into another company in the future at an exec level or whatever their ambitions might be. It's just a hyper scale way to get there faster. And so, taking us back to that 0 to 1 journey of the first product that you guys were launching for Attentive, we have this advice or this mantra in Silicon Valley about launch a product that you're embarrassed about. Curious about how you guys thought about getting a product out into market, especially in the B2B space. Is that the right mantra to be focused on, or how did you guys approach it?
I think that is good advice to give for the average entrepreneur, because I think the average entrepreneur is someone who is building way too much before they get it in the hands of customers, is not getting enough feedback, is in a room and kind of isolated. And I think encouraging them to get something in front of the customer as soon as possible is great general advice. The better answer is a more nuanced, personalized answer, right? If you are entering a market where it is competitive and there's existing products within this market, and there's a certain bar that the product needs to be at in order to be better than those other products, then you probably have to get a certain degree of quality and features and functionality before you can enter the market. But you also understand that there is an existing demand for your product because you are building a better mousetrap, but there are other mousetraps that exist, and there's demand, so you're less worried about there being demand or not. If you think you are actually category creating or doing something that's in a sort of less defined category, less built up category, then yeah, I'd be much more afraid and I would ship a lot faster. But that's much harder to do. And like category creation in reality happens much more seldom than I think people give it credit for. I can't, it's actually almost impossible to think of a modern large software company that actually created a category. Google didn't create a category. There were other search engines before Google, right? Slack didn't create a category. There was, HipChat and a million other app modules before Slack. Email didn't create a category. I'm just looking at the stuff that's open in my other tabs right now. But like, but maybe, I mean, Salesforce might have created a category, maybe when they came out. That might have been a category creation. I don't know. I'm not old enough to know what the other sales CRM software was at that time, but it's very hard to say that you're actually creating a category these days. But there are areas where that happens for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's very rare, but I love your framework around thinking about how to be a 10x better product in an existing space, especially for the B2B entrepreneurs who are building in those sectors. So you go into that discovery piece or lack of discovery in some cases where it's an established category. One of the hardest jobs for entrepreneurs in that 0 to 1 phase is to separate noise from signal in the market. We talked a little bit about this, but tell us more about that pivot you all made at Attentive early on, and when did you know that that initial market wasn't going to work? And why did you have the belief that the ultimate market you chose had real steam behind it to go the distance that it ultimately did?
Well, I knew it wasn't working because we did 150 demos and we really didn't sell any good deals. We had a couple that were like, okay, but the revenue was not great. The willingness to pay was not there. And it just was not, the market was just clearly not strong enough. And this was more of like a category creation type of play. There wasn't another analogous company doing what we were doing where it was like, oh, that company built this up and has $1 billion business, so we're going to do it better and do whatever. It was a totally kind of new sector. So that was it became maybe a little obvious to us to walk away from that. I think that I think another risk for entrepreneurs is there's this mindset of like, you just kind of keep going until it works. I've seen so many people work on stuff for 5-7 years. It doesn't go anywhere, and they should have quit it 5 years ago. So I think you gotta look at something and decide pretty quickly, hey, it's not working, and eject on it. We had something we were doing recently. We put some money in. We were working on it. We spent about 5% of our money, looked at it harder, and we said, you know what? This is just not. We don't see it, and we just blew it up. I don't think that happens fast enough. When there's a good reason, when there's good logical reason on why.
And you have this great anecdote that I've heard about firing that Fortune 500 customer of yours early on as you were thinking about making that pivot. Like, what are some of you talked a little about the difficulty of making some of those decisions, but also focus with regards to launching a new product and who are your core customers? Was there a learning through that 0 to 1 phase for Attentive on who the right set of customers are early and how you should be tackling them when you're such a young and early team?
Yeah, I mean, look, I do think that something I've seen a lot of people fall into, and I think it's particularly people who are not on the tech, like not as technical, is they end up wanting to build something for like every market, or like they want to build every feature, and their V1 has like a bazillion things in it. So I think paring that down is really important.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about competition with regards to your new market that you were chasing at Attentive. How did you think about unpacking that? What are the traps that founders fall into when they're looking at competitive markets early, where they might be over indexing on the incumbents or maybe over believing their own Kool-Aid in terms of building a 10x product? How did you guys take that into your own product roadmap early on and figuring out what to build and where to compete?
I mean, I think that it kind of came back to understanding the customer problem and kind of really going deep in for the Attentive, business in particular. The biggest problem was that it was hard to get people to sign up to get text messages. So we spent a bunch of time trying to figure out ways to get people to sign up more fluidly, and we actually designed and patented this new technology that made it a lot easier for people to sign up. And then that was kind of a big breakthrough for us for having this become a meaningful line of business for these companies.
And I guess in that context, were there early signals that you started to see from some of these customers or that you were looking for in terms of the indications that you were getting to product market fit or early signs of being on the right path?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the biggest signal was we launched an early customer. We launched this technology to get signups, and we turned it on. And the first day, it got like 10 times more signups than we thought it would. So it did really well. A lot of people signed up. We realized we actually had made some mistakes and we're showing it too often. So the number actually ended up being a little lower, but it still was much better than we needed it to be. And then we sent our first message. And when we sent a message, we saw that the message got a lot of people clicking on it. And then subsequently, people bought things. And it made $100 for every dollar that the customer was spending. So we knew at that point, I said, look, we have a product that works. People sign up, we send a message, put in $1, make $100. So I knew that worked. Now I just needed to convince all of these people to start doing it. And that to me was really where we knew the business would work because it actually solved the buyer's problem. And then it was just brute force to get people to do it.
And you talked in other places about hiring sales people or early sales hires in a company's journey. How did you think about balancing founder-led sales versus hiring salespeople early? What's the right time for entrepreneurs to do so? And how do you, as a CEO, continue to stay in the flow of the customer feedback as you start to hire some of those folks early?
Yeah. I thought a few things I'd say. One, finding great salespeople is very hard because great salespeople make a lot of money at their current company. So to get them to quit that job and come to you, why would they do that? So it's pretty darn hard to find those people that are great and get them to move over. Much more likely is the salespeople that are looking for jobs are not as good, right? That's just inherent because sales is a churn and burn career where if you don't make the numbers, you're out and then they have to go find a new job. So obviously there's a lot of other dynamics. A business may not be doing well. It's a later stage. You got bought by private equity. There's a lot of little tactics that I could tell you on how to find good salespeople that it's more about the company than it's about them. But the point I'm getting to is finding good salespeople is very hard. Number one. Number two, selling as a founder is much easier than selling as a salesperson. People love it when the founder is selling to them. They just love it. There's a magic about it. It's showing you care. It makes them feel important. It's a huge advantage. Whenever I do calls as CEO founder, it's always 10 times easier for me than it is for a salesperson. So why not do that as much as you can? And then number three is that when you're actually on the call, you learn a lot more and you can take that and translate that to your business, your decisions, your product team, whatever it is. If you're not there, sure, you can watch the transcript, you can read a transcript or read the notes or even watch the video. But there's a lot that happens on that call that is not easy to summarize simply from the transcript. There's body language, there's intonation, there's just a general vibe that you get from it. And then you also have the opportunity to dig in where you want and ask more questions and feel it out. I can't tell you how many times I read a transcript and then I watched a video and then I met with a client and they're so different.
So, on that path, was there a certain milestone you wanted to hit or a certain feeling of the flywheel was working from a go-to-market perspective before you start leaning into more of that decentralized sales team? Or when did you know, or when maybe in Attentive's life cycle, when did you guys bring on your first sales hire?
So there's two types of sales. There's inside sales and there's outside sales. We brought in 4 inside sales when we started the company. Their job was to book as many meetings as possible. And that was great because it forced us to get a big N whenever we were making decisions on anything, even if we didn't have anything to sell. So I love having a lot of inside salespeople to book meetings. Outside AEs that are actually doing the calls and doing the meetings and booking things, I would keep that number low and do it yourself or someone you really trust there, because again, it runs into this issue of outsourcing it, and you got to feel really close to what's going on there.
God, no, that's super helpful advice. And one thing we haven't touched on in terms of those early days of Attentive is how did you guys think about the financing of the company initially? What were sort of the design principles around what the right seed round looked like for the company?
For Attentive, we put our own money in, and then we were like, hey, if we went back to our investors for our prior company and said, if you want to put some money in, we could take it, but it would have to be great terms. And they ended up agreeing to those great terms, so we did it. And then for later rounds, it was kind of a similar deal. People we'd worked with before for the first round, and then wider groups of people for latter rounds of financing. But in general, I wrote this book that came out in the last year called Problem Hunting. It's got a couple chapters on fundraising. You can read some of the thoughts there in that book on how to do it. But the best advice I can give on fundraising is it's a lot easier to get introduced to an investor than it is to cold email them. And the best way to get introduced is to ping entrepreneurs, explain your story, and ask them for help. Because I found that entrepreneurs, they tend to like other entrepreneurs, right? They tend to want to help out other entrepreneurs. And it's easy for them and maybe even value add. Now, I think that angle to reach them is smart because it's a way to get in front of someone because you've shown you've done your homework, right? You found out who the right investors might be for your business. You found out who's a company that work with those people, and then you go through that entrepreneur. I think that's a great way to do it rather than just kind of pinging the investor directly. It shows that you kind of like understand what they do, that you've done your homework, that you understand who they are and why this might be a fit for them.
One thing I heard you say elsewhere, which I found really interesting, is that sometimes you've said that the VC model kind of force fits entrepreneurs to pick an idea too early sometimes. And we talked a little bit about having the space to go the distance and reaching for that larger outcome. What's the practical advice around that for entrepreneurs? Like, how can they get out of the trap with VCs while still balancing the fact that they, are going to have early expenses, team building, et cetera, happening? Is there a better approach to starting out in the early days?
I think that you can pick a market, and I think you can begin to have a problem. And I think at that point of market and a problem and maybe a twist on a product, you can get money. But I would spend more money earlier on doing research on the problem than I would on executing on the solution. So I don't think people do enough research to understand the problem, to really understand the buyers, to get that all teed up. And the good news is if you do all of that and then you build the solution, you can go back to those people and sell it to them and have your first customers. So I would just spend more time on the problem before I jump into a solution. I think people jump to solutions too quickly, and then they kind of turn into a hammer looking for a nail, where they've got a solution they built and now they just want to find a problem.
Yeah, I think I love it. I love it because in the Attentive context, also, it sounds like the learning was a little bit around how do we find an end market that's ended up looking very different, or at least adjacent to the core market initially. But if you hadn't kind of gone through that experience, you might not have ever even come across that sector.
Yeah, you got to be willing to change. I think people, you can be religiously tied to a problem. You can be very passionate about a problem. I think that's great. A lot of passion about solving a particular problem. That's like the basis of a lot of great companies out there. But the solution needs to be malleable. You can't be wedded to a solution, because if it's not solving the problem, it's not going to work.
On that point, like the early days are obviously very up and down, right? It's messy, it's nonlinear. How do you, as a founder and CEO, balance that on a personal level? And then on the flip of that, or in adjacent to that, how do you communicate and bring your team, early investors, along on that ride that's productive yet transparent and authentic?
My answer to this one has changed over time. The second one has changed. The first one's relatively the same. The first one is like it's going to be ups and downs. It's going to be a roller coaster. Expect, when things are going great, expect things to turn bad. When things are going bad, hope it turns up a little bit, but it may not for a while. But like, that's it. And like at the end of the day, just remember, you're doing something that's like probably better than what 99% of people are doing. So you should be having fun doing it. And if you're not, you may be in the wrong career. On the second question on the team, I used to be on the side of sharing everything and passing along everything and every up and down. I've come to the conclusion that that is not productive because other people do not have the um, fear threshold and the roller coaster affinity that I do. So I think it's better to provide um, a smoother ride for the team so that they can focus on executing. I'm not saying to hide anything. I'm not saying, to cover up anything. I'm just saying you don't need to give them the play by play. And I'll give you an example. With one of my companies, we had a case where someone was considering buying the company. And we went back and forth a lot with this person for like 3 months. And I told way too many people about it. And as it went back and forth, like every back and forth, and there were ups and downs in M&A, way big ups and downs. Like many times we thought it wasn't going to happen. And people couldn't take it, you know? People, when there'd be bad news and they'd hear bad news, they'd just like turn off. They'd be like middle of the day and they'd be like, I can't work. I'm going home. Like it's like too upsetting. So I think that you need to insulate people from those ups and downs because they will happen and let them focus and it's going to be better for everyone.
And maybe taking a step back to the company, we started talking a little bit about the interpersonal dynamics, but if you think about the company side of things, how do you personally define product market fit? And was there a specific aha moment or customer anecdote in Attentive's life cycle where you now knew and realized that you had achieved product market fit?
Yeah. Well, you've got all the metrics and things. Am I solving the problem, or what's my CAC LTV, or all that other type of stuff. But for me, anecdotally, the best was when we had a customer who um, was this gene company in LA customer, and they were doing really well as a customer. Um, and then one day, one of the people that was like one of the founders left and started a company that was like a pixel by pixel copy of our company. So when one of your customers quits their job to start a copycat of your company, that's when you know that you're really on to something.
That might be the best definition of product market fit I've found.
Yeah. When people quit their jobs to go start a competitor, or when people who are working at your company now begin seriously debating leaving, or you're worried that they're going to do that to go start a copycat, that's when you know it's working.
I like it. That's the most unique answer I've heard, but certainly one that makes a lot of sense. Maybe in that context, like, so you felt like you had product market fit. You had made this pivot, which was very successful. How did you know it was time to raise your next round of financing, your Series A? Was it a metric based milestone you were hitting? Was it more of this qualitative assessment that you were just referencing? How did you know that you were ready to take on more financing at that?
Most of my career is kind of spent in the like scarcity of financing mindset. So I like always raised money whenever I could. When people came to me and they were like, "Hey, do you want to raise money?" I mean, I wouldn't say yes to that person, but when I heard that, I would be like, "All right, I guess I'm going to start a process and raise money." Um, so I would always do it pretty aggressively. I'm not sure where we are in the current cycle, but things wound down a lot the last couple of years, and now it feels like they're winding back up again a little bit. But I would get the money when you can. Like, I don't think you're going to regret getting capital for the business.
And how much, as you got into the growth rounds, post Series A, et cetera, did you think about, and you guys have a great set of investors, but how did you think about individuals versus brands or platforms? What mattered to you as you got into more of that hyperscale and hyper growth stages of the company?
Number one, most important is terms. It doesn't matter who the brand is, what they say about it. Things go one way or the other. You want to make sure that the terms are on your side. And there is certainly a truth to top tier investors add pixie dust to your business for a few things. One, recruiting. It is great at recruiting. Two, I think it legitimizes your company brand, which helps sign enterprise customers. And then three, For later financings, a lot of investors, they just follow top tier investors. So it helps a lot with late stage.
Yeah. Going back a little bit to a comment you made about product market fit and these folks, obviously thinking about leaving and joining their starting competitors. In general, great B2B markets, competition always stays high. You have that dynamic, and it certainly, I think, stayed high in the Attentive space. Like, how did you think as the company, again, moved past the sort of 0 to 1 phase, how did you think about competition? Like, is it more about keeping the blinders on, focus on what you're innovating on? Or do you think a lot about what's happening in the competitive space and to your peers or folks who are coming up from behind you?
I think we keep track of them. We try to learn what's happening and, good things that are out there. When you're in a competitive sales process, you want to understand what are you going to win with? What are your differentiators? So I think you have to have a really good understanding for how your product's differentiated and how that differentiation may change over time. So I think from that angle, it's very important. But I don't think you want to get lulled into the game of playing someone else's game on their court, where something we've dealt with a lot is we're the market leader. So there's a lot of companies that are always trying to throw rocks at the market leader, really hoping to start a fight so that they can be seen on the other podium. Well, it's a political tactic, right? It's a political tactic. If you want to be perceived as the other potential option, you attack the leader in the hope that you're perceived as like the other person that's out there, right? It's the same thing in companies where you want to be on the podium next to the leader. So you're going to attack the leader and you really hope that the leader starts debating you, because then that makes you a credible member of the market. So I think it's from more of a marketing standpoint, I think they try to suck you into those all the time.
Maybe taking a step back, it seems pretty evident that we're going through a new technology transformation with AI. Obviously, it's the theme of the year here in Silicon Valley. Attentive rode a lot of the tailwinds of other similar transformation waves across mobile, e-commerce, cloud. Like, how do you think AI is going to impact Attentive's space? What are the opportunities or obstacles for the company moving forward?
I think that AI is going to be huge for marketing automation. And I think that Attentive's got probably the best market position right now because we've been investing in it for a long time to do AI really well. We just had a bunch of releases on our products and they're actually working and used by customers. So I feel pretty good about our market position, but I think you got to embrace this stuff.
Yeah, in a similar vein, it's like a lot of growth stage companies are now actively thinking and launching products, leveraging AI to complement their, existing suite of products. It's kind of like going on a little bit of that 0 to 1 journey in some ways, but obviously at a much different scale. Do you think that some of those same principles early on apply here, or is it a completely different framework to be thinking about adding products at this level and scale?
I think that the issue is that um, there's a lot of check the box happening with AI just to have something, but it actually doesn't solve a real problem, and it doesn't actually add a lot of value, and it doesn't even work better. So there's a lot of sizzle out there, and finding AI that like actually works and actually solves the problem a lot better, that's a harder product problem. But I think if you can do that, sky's the limit.
Yeah. And, in your own role, you stepped back from the CEO role at Attentive recently. How did you think about CEO leadership and when the right time could be for a transition and someone else taking over the reins?
Yeah, I mean, that's a personal thing. I think that for me, it came down to, number one, what did I like to do the most? And what I like to do the most was 0 to 1 product work and 0 to 1 company building, and even 1 to 10, not 500 to a billion. So I think that moving to something that put me back in that ballpark was definitely very appealing. And then I think number two is that I was lucky because I had a really great and still have a great executive team. So there was like just clear people that could do it. And I felt like they would do it just as well, if not better than me in some ways. So I was lucky in that position.
And now you're basically living the 0 to 1 path every day, it sounds like, with your new company, really thinking about new ideas from scratch, getting them to that product market fit stage. Has anything changed in your thinking as you moved into this sort of third act in some ways, and with regards to how you go from 0 to 1 that was different than what you did at Attentive and different than what we talked about from Tap Commerce?
I'd say just on a positive note, there's a tremendous amount of problems out there, and it's hard to pick the ones that you want to focus on. I do think you have to focus, but there's a lot out there, and we just have huge stacks of things we've come up with on ideas and things that we could go tackle for problems out there. So I think it's an amazing time to be an entrepreneur building products. And once you start and doing it, building the product's still hard, still takes time. Getting to something that's at parity is still tough. And I think probably the hardest thing right now is that big tech has so much money. That's the biggest problem. Like, if you want to talk about a problem with entrepreneurship today, the number one problem is that big tech has unlimited money to stop people from starting new companies. And their jobs are sit on your hands jobs. Like, it's not like a lot of value creation is happening with a lot of these jobs. People are barely working at these jobs. I think that's probably the biggest thing that's hurting America right now for entrepreneurship is big tech paying people to sit on the sidelines.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to your earlier point of that the alternatives to entrepreneurship right now is not really, for a lot of folks in Silicon Valley who are in these fortunate positions to work for big tech, is not really standing and doing labor all day. It's really, to your point, or in your words, sitting on your hands and collecting a nice paycheck working at big tech, but not actually going into the entrepreneurial arena as much.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens, right? It's like, look, you go work at a startup, or you can go work at big tech where you're going to get 50% more money, maybe 2 times more money. Your stock is liquid, and you're going to work 20 hours a week or less, maybe remotely, maybe not, to have a nice brand that you work for and a very respectable sort of risk managed career. That's tough, right? That's an easy thing to get sucked into. I think a lot of people get sucked into that. And I think the net negative there is that while obviously those companies have tremendous positive societal impacts in a lot of things they do, the incremental value for each incremental person at these companies does not have a big impact.
Yeah. How many of the ideas that you're working on right now have a component of AI to them?
I think everything has a component of AI to it these days in software. Like, you got to be thinking about how you're going to use it. It's just a nice, great new tool. But AI can't be the reason for the company. For what you're doing, the answer can't just be the reason for our existence. Is because our software has AI in it, and that's why it's better. You need to explain why what you're doing is better outside of just how AI is making it better.
For the last question, if you think about your own journey, you've talked a lot about what's important to you or focusing on things that are important. What is it fundamentally you think, like, what's the number one through line for you in terms of what matters most to you as you think about your own career journey?
What matters to me? My hope is to be able to tackle really interesting big problems that I feel like are very important for the United States and more broadly people. And I think over time being able to weigh into more and more problems that are maybe riskier to solve, where the solutions take more time to build and more capital needs to put into them. Because those are just interesting. But I mean, look, I like, we're working on a problem now, and one of the big problems we're focused on now, and I think it's a huge problem that's only going to get bigger. And there are existing companies trying to solve it, but we need to do a better job. We're not doing a good job solving it. But it's areas that are kind of might be perceived as more boring too. I think that there's a lot of stuff out there that matters that needs to be solved.
That's great. Well, Brian, this has been awesome. I know we've covered a lot of different topics, but a lot of great gems in terms of just practical advice for founders, and most importantly, hearing your own inspiring journey building so many of these companies, going from 0 to 1 and now much more than that as well. So thank you for taking the time to chat with us. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been great.